before I start, I want to say it's really amazing to see how many talks in this conference are about accessibility. It's really amazing. It's not something that was planned, at least for my side, but it's really amazing to see it. So I want to start with a true story, with a personal story of mine. It happened a few years ago in a previous workplace. We were having a planning meeting. We sat there, the UI team, the product manager, my group leader, and the company's architect, and we discussed the upcoming features that we planned for the sprint. The meeting was quite long, and as you might imagine, but at the end we came to conclusions, and all the things were set for starting the development. But just a moment before the meeting ended, my product manager approached me and said, "Asaf, there's just like one more thing I need to do. One more thing. I need you to make the application accessible." Well, immediately I said, "Sure, no problem. Let's make the application accessible." But then I remembered that at the moment I had no idea what accessibility means. So I asked him, I said, "Hey, Mr. Product Manager, what do you mean by accessibility?" He looked at me, and then he shrugged his shoulders, and then he used his confident PM voice and said, "Well, just put accessibility inside the code." Well, I looked at him, he looked at me. Fast forward 3 months, and the mission was accomplished. The application was accessible. It was a huge success. How did we do it? Well, it required lots of hard work, manual testing, many consultants that came and helped us, and a lot of accessibility-specific code and a lot of testing. But if you take a look under the hood, the code is not something I was very proud of. It was full of hacks and patches. A lot of extra HTML tags were added to almost extra attributes were added to almost every HTML tag. Lots of accessibility-specific lines of code. It's not something very fun to work with. Something like this. I mean, it works. The car can drive, but I don't know how fun it is to look at it and how maintainable it is. Well, you might think the story ends here, but wait, there is more. 2 months later, the designers team announced that the company is starting a rebranding phase. There's a new logo. It means we have a new color scheme. We have new pop-ups, new buttons, new drop-downs. The user interactions are all changing. Accessibility-wise, it means that we are going back to square one. And I thought to myself, well, no way I'm going to do it all over again. There must be an easier way. And that's what I want to talk about today. How can we make accessible code in a way that makes it last? So it will survive the next refactor or the next rebranding, that if you stay in the company long enough, it will happen. So before I start with this, let me introduce myself. My name is Asaf. I'm the father of Sar, Eitan, and Aviv. He was 1 2 weeks ago, Mazal Tov. And I've been to the web development industry for over a decade in various roles. My current position is the front-end tech lead in a great company called EventHandler. In EventHandler, we are developing tools for developers to make their life easier when it comes to accessibility. It means that we are an accessibility technological company that creates Chrome extensions, mobile extensions, and uses smart algorithms such as machine learning and computer vision to find more accessibility issues and provide tools for the developers to use these technologies. One of the tools that I'm going to discuss today is an automation SDK that exposes these capabilities for automation developers or for front-end developers who want to use them for their own code. So this is my personal journey of developing an accessible application for a company that specializes in accessibility. So it's not a question. I mean, the code must be accessible. So what is accessibility? Accessibility, maybe you're familiar with the concept, and if not, I'll try to define it in a very broad way. So accessibility is about inclusion. It's about letting all the people in. It's about letting people with different disabilities use your application. It means that if someone, for example, is motorically impaired and is having trouble using a mouse, it means that your entire application must be accessible using the keyboard only. It means that every interaction on the screen must be accessible using the keyboard. Or if a person is visually impaired and cannot see very well, or colorblind, or has some kind of disability related to vision, and uses assistive technology such as a screen reader, so we need to make our website in a way that the assistive technology can narrate the content and to use audio to convey the messages and the interactions to the user. Just think, for example, that you have a product carousel that does something on hover. For example, it reveals more information when you hover over the card of the product. So if you cannot use a mouse, you can perform the hover. So you need to find a way, a creative way, or a UX way to provide this information to all the people. So let's dive into an example. For this, I want you to play with me a little game. So let's imagine that we are all a startup. It's quite a big startup with like 100 people, but I'm going to give you all equal shares. So please put the time and don't be lazy. So, and it's very simple. Well, it's called Hogwarts on Demand. The business model is very simple. You select your favorite Harry Potter character, you select the date, you select the location, and you book it, and it will come to pay you a visit. It's good for bar mitzvah, it's good for birthday, it's good for conferences. Imagine if Hagrid was here instead of me, it could be amazing. He is very good at accessibility, maybe. So you select the character. It could be Harry or Snape, or it could be Dudley if you're weird, and it could be Hermione if you're my daughter. And you select the date and the location, my daughter's birthday, and you book it. So this is the business model, and this is what we are building together. So imagine that there are more pages on this application. So this is like the home page, but there is also a sign-up page, there is a payment page, there is an open dispute page, which is very popular. And there is also contact us and other pages. So we want to make sure this application is accessible. So where should we start? Where should we start looking for accessibility issues? How should we address this, this challenge? So when coming to analyze the accessibility issues inside a website, there are several ways to look at a website from the testing point of view. Well, one option is to look at a website and see what flows are in it. For example, there is the login flow that starts with the login form, and then the user is in the system, and maybe it ends with the user happily inside the system, or ends with him or her logging out. Another flow is the purchase flow that starts with selecting a character, and then it ends with the payment method, shipping method, and the user gets a receipt, and maybe end with the character visiting him. And there is a support flow. I can name other flows, but you get the idea. So another option is to look at an application and in a different way and say the application is built out of pages. So what if we cover page by page? What if we'll start with the home page? We'll find all the accessibility issues that are in the home page, and then we'll go to the contact us page, and we'll find all the accessibility issues there, and then we'll go to the payment page, etc. You go page by page. So this is another option which is valid. But as front-end developers and as modern front-end developers that I guess you are using React if you're here, and if not, well, tell me after what you do use and why do you come here. So we tend to look at the world as composed out of components. So when we look at the website, we see that it's built out of components. For example, it's built out of buttons, forms, drop-downs, pop-ups, tables, and there are other components as well. So each one of these components have a defined behavior, have a defined set of properties, and different permutations. So where should we start our accessibility testing? Well, because I'm working in a company that specializes in accessibility, and we talk to a lot of our clients, and we are learning from their experience, and for our experience, what is the easier way? So the way that works for us is the following. Flows is good. It covers the flows. Pages is also a valid way, But components, we love. Because components gives you a way, when testing for components, there are a few benefits. One, that components tend to have less code than pages that are built off multiple components. And the less code you have, the easier it is to test it, for accessibility or for other reasons as well. And the second reason is that accessibility, unlike a unit test or something logical, many times when you find a problem that is related to accessibility, the solution involves more people than yourself alone. So if I find a color contrast issue or something deeper, maybe we have a problem that we need to add more data to the page, so it will be there if the user cannot see very well. It's not something that I as a developer can decide on my own how to fix it. I need to consult the UX people, I need to consult the designers, the product managers, and it's something much easier to do and much faster to do on a smaller scale. So component works for us. This is the recipe that works for us for making our own component library accessible. So first, we break down our application into small components, identify the component. Secondly, we build the component with the appropriate HTML tags. I'll go into details in a moment. And third, we automate. We automate as much as we can. Okay, so let's break down our application into small components. Let's have a look again at our amazing application and recognize some of the components here. So one component here is the drop-down component. And the other component is that there is a day speaker here that allows you to pick the date, and there is a yellow button that you can click on, and then you search for the availability. So because we decided to test on the component level, I don't really care about the business logic. I don't want to test it with this information. For example, I don't want my test to go to the server and fetch data, so I will see all of these characters and to see real availability. It's important if I want to test it business-wise, but for accessibility, I want to render the component as isolated as I can, and in many situations, in many permutations as I can. So to do that, we identified our own components, and we built a component library out of them. We put it in a different place in our code that holds only the visual components. So our component library, we started by identifying the common components. I add some more metadata. We have 4 or 5 front-end projects that use the same component. So the first stage was to look at this project and identify what we want to extract to a different place. And then we created a designated Git repository to hold all of these components. Afterwards, we consume them back in all the products. So now we are leveled and we are continue to work. And now we identified that in this component library, we have components in different sizes, meaning some of the components are very simple, such as titles and headers and buttons. And some of the components are more complex and deserves maybe more thorough testing. For example, a table that supports pagination, or a chart that behaves differently in different viewports, or pop-ups that have a specific behavior that we want to make sure is accessible. And finally, because we decided to invest in this infrastructure, so we put our time and our effort in both functional and accessibility testing of the component library. This is the stack we used. We use React and TypeScript to build the components. We use Storybook to visualize the component and to see how they look isolated. This is also a great way to communicate how your system looks among the team and to the design team that can have a look at the link of the Storybook, the public link, and to see where we're standing, both on timeline-wise and what's going on inside the application. For test, we use Cypress and Circle CI for continuous deployment. And what I didn't put in this slide is the testing tool we used for the accessibility testing, which is actually the tool that is developed in Evinst. So because we're an accessibility company and we are developing very smart algorithms to detect accessibility issues, we thought it might be very interesting to use our own tools for testing our own code. And it turned out to be a huge success because at first it gives you great coverage for accessibility. And secondly, it's a good way to provide feedback. It's like the feedback loop is very small if the length between the product, the producer and the consumer is like the length of my elbow and say, hey, I need this in the report, like please add some more data. So this is the stack. Moving on, as my product manager said, we need to put the accessibility inside the code. So let's take a dive into one of the components. We want to create an accessible button. So what does it mean for a button to be accessible? Take like 10 seconds and think about it while I drink water. Okay, amazing. So we said that we need some kind of indications, like visual clues that this is a button, and it should do something on hover or on focus. Exactly. I mean, you need to have some kind of indication or support for keyboard or for other technologies. Amazing. So here are some of the characteristics that make a button accessible. So, as you said, we need to be focusable by keyboard. So if you cannot use a mouse, you can focus on this button. Now, after you focused on this button, we need some kind of visual clue that the button is selected. This is called a focus indication. So we need to make sure we have focus indication. And after we are in focus, we need to make sure that when you click enter, the functionality of the button occurs. And from another direction, if you're using a screen reader, so we need to tell the screen reader, we need our application to tell the screen reader that this is a button. So we could convey this message in audio as well. So let's start by creating this button. So this is a basic start. We took a div and we added a click handler. So believe me, it works. If I click on the button, it alerts hello. Amazing, amazing work. Thank you. So let's expand the example. We want to make it focusable by keyboard, so we use the tab index attribute. This is the way to tell the browser that this element is in the list of items that receive focus by the tab key. Now I want to expand it even further. So I want to make sure that the enter key works. For that, we will add an event listener for the enter key. So when the user hits enter, the function will be called. And finally, we want to tell screen readers that this is a button. So we use the role attribute to say that this is a button. Well, this code is very accessible. Congratulations, everybody. Our startup is going to be a great success. Very good. There's only one problem, that this is a lot of code for a very simple button. And it merely begins to be a real button, because a real button, for example, needs to support a disabled state, right? So if the button is disabled, we need this on key press not to occur, and maybe we need to have some kind of visual indication that this is disabled, and we want a tab focus when it's disabled, or we don't want it. I mean, we need to think about these things. And maybe we'll have a primary and secondary modes for the button, or dark and light mode. So this button is going to be bigger and bigger. And we're going to add code into it. And the problem with code is that code can fail. And code needs maintainability, and it needs documentation, and it needs testing, and it means that every time someone changes this code, we need to test it, and we need to test it also for accessibility if we care about accessibility. What if I tell you there's an easier way? A way that involves much less code. Actually, it involves almost no code at all. What if I told you we can use the button tag? Okay, so HTML has some great accessibility magic inside of it. So native elements such as the button has many accessibility features built in. So when using the button tag, we get everything we spoke about out of the box. It has focus indication, it supports enter or something we didn't speak about. In some operating systems, you need to also to support the spacebar key. So it does it by itself. It has like a small border when you focus on it. It supports disabled state and it doesn't pass the click. So, and we don't need to care about tab index or role or things like that. So the first conclusion is to love your HTML tags. And this was an example of the button element. But this is true also for age 1, age 2, like all the header tags, that if you use them instead of divs everywhere, it will give your page some kind of order, which will be also meaningful for screen readers. And you can use the input tag if you want to create a text field, like text input field, instead of crafting a div that does everything. The HTML is very powerful, but it's so powerful that you can make anything of anything. So if we stick or if we learn the basics of HTML, it gives us a lot of power. Moving on to our final part, which is adding a layer of accessibility automation to our component library. So this is a button. This time I learned from my previous slide and created the button using the button tag. And this button has two modes, a primary mode and secondary mode. So when we want to render it, we need to pass these props. The syntax here is of React and TypeScript. So now we want to add stories to it. The syntax here is of the storybook library. And basically what you see on the screen is two stories, one of the primary button, one of the secondary button. I'll show you in a minute how it looks. And so this is how we look when we start Storybook. So this is our buttons. You can see a dark, rich green in the primary button and whitey white on the secondary button. So these are our two stories. Now we want to take these stories, which are representing our button, and we want to use these as the basis of our test. So to do it, we'll use a small functionality that exists inside Storybook, which is this button. I put some arrows so everybody can see. And if you click on this button, it will open a page that contains only the component, like the component that we want to render without all the Storybook wrapper, without the menu on the left and without the bar on top. So this will be the thing that we are testing because it's isolated and it's rendered. So all the CSS is there. All the interactions are there. It's not dead code, it's live code. And you can do whatever you want with it. So this is going to be the basis of our functional test. Now we'll use Cypress to create this functional test. This test is very simple. Actually, you see two tests, which are the same, one for the primary and one for the secondary button. It goes to that URL of the isolated component. It performs a click and asserts that the click is registered and working. Let's run it. Believe me, it works. And in testing, green is for good or for G. It's something like that. I mean, it works and it's good. It's green. So we are happy. And now I want to add accessibility to the mix. So when thinking about it, let's think about some of the things that we want an automated accessibility testing tool to find in such a scenario. So these are some of the errors that we wanted to find. We want to see that all the images, if there are images inside the component, for example, if one of our components is a product carousel and it has images, we want to make sure that all the images have alternative text. And if we create a button component, so we already know it, that it should be focusable by keyboard. And if we create a focus, we create a pop-up, we needed to validate that the focus stays inside the pop-up when we open it. And if the user hits the tab key, he doesn't navigate to items that are underneath that pop-up. And also to make sure that there is a sufficient color contrast between the text and the background or inside of images that we use, that they look sharply and look good enough for all people. Okay, so all of these things are implemented inside the Evinst SDK, which is the testing SDK that we develop in-house, and we use it here for testing. This is a general structure of the test. We go to a URL, we start our engines using the evstart command, and then we do stuff. For example, we click on the button, we hover, we refresh the page, we open the dropdown, we enter text. I mean, it records everything that happens between the start and the evstop command, which is the last command. And when we run evstop command, it returns the list of issues that it detected in this component. So in our button example, this is how it looks like. You can identify maybe the code in the middle from the code 2 slides ago. And if not, it's okay. So this test is also in Cypress, and it starts with recording for accessibility issues. Then we perform our functional test. And afterwards, because we are an accessibility company, there is no room for mistakes here, and we want to make sure that there are no accessibility issues. So we validate that there are no issues at all. And when we run it, we fail, which is not very fun. But okay, let's have a look at the report. So in the report, it says very clearly, dude, you have a color contrast issue with a bunch of technical information, but for me, I'm lazy, so I'll just have a look at the image. Okay, so here you can see that there is a problem with the secondary button, and the problem is with the contrast between the text and the background. If I want to go more technical, you can clearly see that there is a color contrast issue between RGB 104, 100, 100, 06, 09, and white. And because I'm not a qualified designer, and this is a presentation, I can do whatever I want, and I'll just change it to black, and the color contrast is fixed. And, well, I should code like this, it will be very fun. In real life, this is the place, this is the time I would consult the designer, I guess. Or maybe I'll do like this, not sure. Okay, so now we run it again, and everything passed, and we're green. So this was the story of a single component. Now we want to productize the process. So in our CI pipeline, every time we create a new branch or push new code, we build the project, we run Storybook with the latest changes, and then we run both accessibility testing and functional testing. And if everything goes according to plan, we deploy and we have a new version of a better component library. So this is our real component library. These are all the components that we have. Some statistics. The component library has more than 30 components. Some of them are simple, such as buttons and titles. Some of them are more complex, such as drop-down menus, tabs, charts, and whatever you can think of. And the way that we develop the application is that every time we create a new component, automatically we add a new code, we create stories, and we add functional and accessibility tests. This makes our job much easier in maintaining accessibility because we know that when a component entered the component library, it was accessible. And if it's not accessible, then we need to work on it, and it cannot enter the centralized pipeline. Takeaways. First, if you want to build a component library like this, the first stage is to divide and conquer, to split your application into small pieces. Second, be friends with HTML. Maybe it sounds something very ancient, but this is the basic of how a browser works. And being friends with HTML can save you a lot of time and lots of bugs. And third, automate as much as you can. Automate accessibility testing, automate functional testing, and automate the CI. It will make your life easier. And finally, accessibility is something that can be driven top-down using a directive from legal department or from product or from marketing. Or that if you, as a developer, feel that your application is good enough and the service you provide is important enough so all the people with different disabilities could use it, you can start doing it, making your application accessible one step at a time and one component at a time. I want to thank you very much for listening. This was my first time talking to such a conference. Thank you very much. I'll be here for questions. And remember, if you hesitate, accessibility is much more accessible than you think. Thank you very much.